It allows us to better define the requirements and determine mitigation steps. And actually, if I look at these two, I can identify even risk levels at the business basis. This user requirement, how does it affect my business continuity? If something goes wrong with that user requirement, how does that affect my commitment to regulatory agencies? And how does it affect my commitment to my customers with respect to safety? They allow us to better define the project scope, identify where to direct our planning and designing efforts, identify testing levels, and recognize system risk required by user and organization. So those actually are the basics of why we actually risk assess user requirements and why it is so important for our system implementation success. So now let's look at the actual risk management process. And first, what do we mean by risk management? Well, risk management is a structural mechanism that provides visibility into threats to system success. What does that mean? So if you think about a structural mechanism, you think about an entity. You could actually think about a structure, okay? And this structure provides visibility into threats to system success. It's awesome. So risk management, if you establish risk management within your system implementation processes, now you are able to see every time you start a project, what are all those threats that you may have for system success and be able to tackle them and address them. There are 3 steps in risk management. The first one is you first measure or assess for risk. After you do that, then you develop strategies on how to reduce that risk to acceptable levels. And third, you maintain that reduced level of risk. And that is so important. And many times, organizations forget the importance of maintaining. They do the first 2, they forget about this. And what may happen is that a system enhancement actually may take away your strategy and bring risk levels high if you don't keep an eye on maintaining your risk levels low. So let's look at an illustration now of what we mean with the process of risk management. First, we gather our user requirements. After we gather them, we identify risks and we analyze those risks. After we analyze them and we prioritize them, we establish mitigation controls in order to reduce the risk levels through contingency and containment actions. And once we put those in place, we do an ongoing evaluation to always keep those risk levels down. So let's look at the beginning. Why is gathering user requirements important and what we do with those user requirements? And the reason for this is that when we speak about risk management, we then also, in parallel, need to also speak about user requirements management. If we just gather what user wants and just do not give more importance to our user requirements, then we are actually going to miss the usability of our user requirements and actually be taking steps to less success in our system implementations. For example, something that you should consider is once as you're gathering your user requirements is to assign them to categories. And by doing this, it allows you to identify, oh, are you missing anything? Or for our users to identify, am I missing anything? For example, operational requirements. They establish what is required of the system. Performance. It establishes the response time. For example, if we are developing a system for the warehouse where they have a handheld that allows them to, as they scan a product, identify what is their dates and expiration dates. They need that information right away. They cannot be standing there after scanning a box of a product and wait 20 minutes to get an answer. So users can identify that. Data, they can describe the type of data that they need and how they want to handle that data. Interfaces, they can say, oh, I need my system to actually receive data from the HR system as new people come into the organization, so that now I receive the records of those names. And that is actually an interface. Our users may not call it an interface, but it actually is. We have environment requirements, safety, and regulatory requirements. If we're talking about a pharmaceutical, if we're talking about a company that actually develops food, they have certain regulations that the systems need to abide by. So we actually identify those requirements so that as we develop our system, we keep those in mind. Once you gather the requirements, in order to manage requirements, you give them to assign. You need to assign them a status. Example of status, in progress. What does that allow me to do? In a way, it's like configuration management. If I do a query of all of my requirements in progress, it tells me where everybody is working. If I do a query of my implemented requirements, it actually tells me what I have operational at the moment, what I have live. If I do a query of what has been enhanced, I'm being able to tell progress of how much we have worked in making our systems just what our customers need. Canceled, very important. We use this a lot, particularly in projects where our users may cancel a requirement, and then along the way, perhaps when we are testing a functionality, they may say, oh, but where is this? And we can go back and say, you canceled it. And unless we document it, we cannot give that information to the customer. We can defer requirements. For example, we say, no, we're going to do this during phase 2. Or we can retire them. Why? Because we are retiring functionalities that the users do not need anymore. Once we have put together our requirements, we need to identify who are going to be the people that are going to assess our requirements. And these should be key members of our user community. Your user requirements should not be risk assessed by the technical team, because they are not aware of how the business will use the system. They are aware of the functionalities and how they receive that information through user requirements, but only users can identify the risk of that requirement if it were to go wrong, how that impacts their business. You have identified your user requirements. You have actually established, put them into categories and established levels for them. So what do you do now? You select a risk assessment tool. What I'm giving you here is examples of 2 very good risk assessment tools that you can look into. One is ISO 14971, which actually I mentioned here version 2000, but the version 2007 is out. And then the GAMP risk assessment tool. The difference between these is that the ISO 14971, it actually measures risk in a more qualitative manner, while GAMP measures risk levels in a quantitative manner. We actually like the GAMP version, and we are going to talk about a tool that we have developed ourselves based on GAMP, because we like to measure, so we want our risk assessment tool to be quantitative. But the only thing that we do is that we remove risk likelihood from our assumptions. Why? Because we are saying, with respect to software development, that the risk likelihood is always there. With software, the risk likelihood is always there. So what we do is that our tool is going to measure the severity of impact times the probability of detection, how probable it is that I'm going to detect that this problem happened, in order to give me my risk priority.